Nikolai was breathing heavily, leaning back against the cold, charred wall. The charred plaster crumbled, as if the world itself had crumbled to dust. His face was scarred by fire. The skin was pulled tight. His left cheek was covered with rough scars. One eye almost did not open. He ran his palm over his stubbly cheek, feeling the alien, uneven texture, and grinned hoarsely. Images of the past floated before my eyes. The warm light of the lamp, the smell of homemade borscht, the voice of my wife, the laughter of my daughter. It wasn't long ago, but it seemed like hundreds of years had passed. He clutched the machine gun in his hands, checked the cartridge in the chamber, and gritted his teeth. The world collapsed in 20 hours. It was not a war. There was no front line, strategic moves, negotiations, or hope for help. It was a massacre, methodical, merciless, leaving no chance. In the early hours, people thought it was a mistake, an accident, some kind of glitch. Then the sky burst open, and war machines poured into the cities. Giant, multi-legged creatures with smooth metal hulls, shimmering in the flames of the conflagrations. They didn't fire bullets or rockets, they just incinerated everything around them. Their guns burned concrete, turned people into dust, and melted tank armor as if it were made of wax. The army didn't even have time to turn around. The first battles ended in 10 minutes, followed by mass extermination. They fell from the sky, elongated capsules, from which clumsy silhouettes at first glance broke out. The first people who saw them screamed and fired, but in a moment, they turned into smoking stumps. The skin of the alien soldiers looked like a tangle of metal and flesh. They moved quickly, with unnatural clarity, dismembering the victims in several movements. Their hands ended in blades, pincers that cut like laser saws. Their eyes glowed with a white, cold light, and they left no traces except for pools of blood and bodies without heads. But someone managed to survive. Nikolai survived because he was in the Arctic when it all started. There, among the snow and ice, there were no large cities, no roads, no mass extermination. The survivors gathered in old mines, abandoned military bases, and bunkers that had previously been considered useless. They didn't know how many of them were left. They didn't know who else was fighting. The connection was gone. The satellites were destroyed. They lived according to old maps, collected supplies, stole the remnants of weapons from destroyed army depots. They have become partisans, the last hope of the people. Nikolai slowly got up, moved his shoulders, banishing the aching pain in his back. His men lined up along the wall, clutching machine guns, breathing heavily in the night air. Someone was nervously sorting through grenades in their pouches. Someone was checking the magazine, but no one said a word. They knew what was coming. Too often they had seen their comrades vanish in the flames of the flashes, as metal creatures shredded them to shreds, leaving only smoking ashes in their wake. But they were moving forward. "Let's go! Let's go! Let's go, guys!" With one fist. Nikolai waved his hand sharply, and the squad moved along the ruined street, hiding in the shadows. They moved quickly, in short runs, holding their weapons at the ready. The sky above them was dark, but the cold white lights of patrol drones flickered through the gaps in the smoke. They knew they didn't have much time. A new reset will start soon, and then no one will leave. In the distance, beyond the ruins, a low metallic rumble could be heard. Nikolai raised his fist, and the soldiers froze. A patrol walker was coming around the corner, a four-legged vehicle festooned with sensors and long-muzzled plasma cannons. She scanned the street, looking for warmth, movement, smells. One wrong step and she would turn the guns around, grind them to dust. Nikolai held his breath and slowly sank to one knee. Their lives were being decided now. A thin black thread encircled the planet, going beyond the horizon. It could be seen with the naked eye. A smooth, alien ring, shimmering in the rays of the dying sun. Scientists from the Resistance claimed that this was the beginning of the construction of the Dyson sphere, a monumental mechanism capable of absorbing all the energy of the sun. The aliens had destroyed their planet, exhausted their resources, and were now taking over the Earth, turning it into a new colony. They didn't just come, they planned to stay here forever. Parasites, filthy insect-like reptiles that sucked the life out of worlds. People couldn't let them finish what they started. Their group of 20, One people was preparing to storm the main space communications terminal. It was through this node that the enemies coordinated the teleportation of troops from orbit, called for reinforcements, and maintained control over the planet. If you destroy it, the invasion will slow down, the enemies will be left without immediate logistics, and the resistance will get a chance. It won't change the war, but it will give them time, and time is the most valuable thing they have left. The first explosion split the night. The wall of the terminal shook and debris rained down. Nikolai was the first to rush forward, pressing against the heated metal, skirting the clouds of smoke. The guards at the entrance were already responding. Tall, with thin, unnaturally long limbs. Their eyes flashed with white light, their bodies trembled and their energy blades glowed. They didn't move like humans. Their movements were jerky, as if they were subject to a complex algorithm. The first automatic burst missed, but the second tore one of them apart. Black blood splattered on the walls, spreading across the smooth surface. The second sentry jumped to the side, avoiding the bullets, but received a grenade under his feet. In a flash, his remains scattered in all directions. The third man almost managed to react, but a heavy bullet from a sniper rifle pierced his chest plate, kicking out sparks. "Go ahead, put the squeeze on," Nikolai shouted. The resistance fighters rushed inside. Red alarm lights flowed through the corridors of the terminal. The walls came alive, covered with flickering symbols. They didn't understand the language, but they knew the alarm had already gone off. The enemies knew they were here. More alien warriors poured in from the far passage. Their bodies glistened in the cold light, their pincers clanked, and their built-in guns were charged with silent electrical pulses. The first attack was devastating. A blue flash incinerated one of the fighters, leaving not even bones. The second one swept past, scorched the wall, causing the concrete to swell and crack. "Grenades! Faster!" Hand mines flew into the air, lit up the corridor with flashes of fire. The enemies wavered, but did not retreat. They moved like a single organism, prudently, methodically. One of them broke through the fire, knocked the fighter down, plunged his blades into his chest. The scream merged with the sound of machine gun fire as the remaining soldiers opened heavy fire. Nikolai broke through and hid behind the communications console. The displays showed thousands of data that he didn't understand. One thing he knew for sure was the heart of the invasion. Here, the enemies held control over all their operations. "Explosives! We lay it down and leave." The resistance engineers were already working. The charges went in a circle, ticking away in a deadly countdown. The enemies did not retreat. The last defenders of the terminal rushed to the attack, trying to break through and destroy the saboteurs. In close combat, they were faster, stronger. One of them grabbed onto a resistance fighter, threw him against the wall, and broke his ribs in one movement. "Damn it! They're climbing! Hold the position! 1 more minute!" They retreated, firing in all directions. The terminal hummed and vibrated, as if it felt its death. Nikolai fired the last burst, covered the rest, and made a final dash for the exit. Something flashed behind him, and the hallway was filled with light. "Get out of here!" They burst out a second before the explosion. The terminal shuddered, the metal crumpled, and the black panels shattered into fiery fragments. A column of flame rose above the ruins, topped with fragments of alien technology. There was a black ring line flickering in the sky, but now it was mute. Without communication, without coordination. The first step has been taken. Smoke from the destroyed terminal was still rising into the sky, mixing with low clouds. Nikolai looked around the battlefield. The 5 fighters did not move. Their bodies lay among the fragments of metal and walls. 3 more were injured, but they could walk. The others, covered in dust and soot, held their weapons at the ready, forming a circular defense. No one was talking. Only heavy breathing and the crackling of the radio filled the silence. Gliders circled in the sky, flat structures moving without visible engines. They glided through the air silently, as if studying the survivors. No one could understand how and on what principle the aliens acted. They could have missed an entire column of armored vehicles, but destroyed a single scout a few blocks from their positions. Sometimes they just watched, hovering in the air without opening fire. Sometimes they attacked with lightning speed, wiping the target into dust. "Eyes up! Control the sky!" Nikolai adjusted his machine gun, exchanged glances with the soldiers. Do not lower your weapon. If they decide to start, we won't have time. He switched on the radio, pushing through the static. The terminal explosion disrupted communication, but signals were still being transmitted on some frequencies. Blizzard. This is Storm 1. We need a conclusion. I repeat, we need a conclusion. We have reached the target. The facility has been destroyed. Evacuation is required. The answer did not come immediately. The hum of the gliders intensified, and several cars hovered directly above the group, their silhouettes reflected in the dusty haze. Storm 1. Understood. Hold your position. There will be a helicopter in your sector in 10 minutes. 10 minutes could have taken forever. The fighters froze, looked at each other, and watched the sky. The gliders slowly moved on, leaving them among the ruins. Perhaps they lost contact with the command. Perhaps they did not receive clear orders. Or maybe they were just playing with them, giving them hope. They won't attack, one of the fighters said softly. Don't relax, Nikolai snapped. 10 minutes. Time dragged on, as if someone had deliberately slowed it down. The wind blew dust through the streets, and the ruined buildings looked even more dead than before. The radio silence was oppressive. Then, in the distance, there was a low rumble of blades. A helicopter appeared in the sky. The helicopter was climbing, leaving the smoking ruins of the terminal in its wake. Below, among the shattered concrete, there were fighters who did not have time to pick up. They were too weak to move, but they were still breathing, which meant they could wait for the next evacuation. Nikolai, sitting by the open hatch, tightly clutched the machine gun and looked at the cracked streets, at the smoldering skeletons of cars, at the twisted silhouettes of buildings that no longer belonged to people. 2 years ago, the world changed forever. The first days of the invasion were not a battle. They became a sweep. War machines burned down cities methodically, without emotion, with precision beyond human comprehension. It was all over before the military realized what they were facing. Then the second wave came, and the transformation of the world began. They didn't just destroy cities, they changed them. Buildings were collapsing, but new ones were rising in their place. They were made of smooth black metal, stretched up, and they were too regular, as if they hadn't been made for humans. Some neighborhoods have disappeared, and in their place have been geometrically verified structures resembling laboratories or hangars. Drones combed the streets, monitored, analyzed, but did not always attack. People couldn't understand their principles. They could ignore a whole caravan of vehicles, but at the same time swiftly destroy a single scout making his way to the rear. Giant towers towered over the former megacities, reaching into the sky like steel needles. They were empty. No windows, no doors, no signs of life. Sometimes the resistance tried to get inside, but no one returned. There were no bodies, no signals, just a clearly audible hum that could not be recorded on the devices. In these places, even compasses failed, and time passed differently. The most terrifying thing was the ring stretching from pole to pole. In the first months, no one understood what it was intended for. Then the resistance scientists came to the conclusion that it was a blank. The aliens began to build a Dyson sphere, turning the Earth into an energy hub. The planet has ceased to be just a place for them to live. It has become a source. They didn't need people. They weren't interested in resources. They came to make the world their own. Nikolai, look. The voice of the fighter at the hatch rose to a scream. He jerked his head up. There was a change in the sky where the black line of the ring stretched. It had never been active before. The ring remained dead, like a passive structure suspended in the atmosphere. Now, thin lines of light ran across its surface, connecting into complex patterns. It wasn't an accidental glitch. It was starting. Is this a reaction to the explosion? The pilot's voice was trembling with tension. Nikolai did not immediately respond. Something tightened painfully in my chest, and my thoughts suddenly became clear and cold. No, he breathed. The sky opened up. High above the horizon, where the black line passed, space split. The air trembled like glass before impact, and then cracked. The rift slowly expanded, spreading apart, revealing not darkness, not space, but emptiness. She didn't move. There was no light, no depth, no signs of matter. It wasn't just a gap in the atmosphere. It was the absence of everything, as if another reality was unfolding before their eyes. At that moment, the instruments in the cabin went out. The connection was cut off. Static filled the radios, then indistinct sounds. "We've been spotted!" The pilot jerked the control stick sharply, trying to steer the car away. But it was too late. The rift wavered, then widened. The space around him had changed. The helicopter shuddered as if it had hit an invisible barrier. The cabin was filled with alarms. The instruments began to go crazy. Screens were blinking, compasses were spinning erratically, and all communication channels were clogged with noise. "We're falling! Control failure!" The pilot violently pulled the levers, but the car wouldn't obey. The rift in the sky continued to widen. The space around him was shaking, as if the air was no longer stable. Nikolai looked down, trying to concentrate, but the landscape beneath him was changing. He no longer recognized this city. 2 years ago, there were residential areas, shopping malls, and gas stations here. Now it was something else. Geometrically correct buildings, built in perfect symmetries, replaced the chaotic urban buildings. They didn't look like buildings, but they didn't look completely alien either. Outwardly, they were just structures made of metal and glass. But something was wrong. "They've redone the city," one of the fighters whispered. That's exactly how they acted. At the beginning of the occupation, they simply destroyed everything they saw. They wiped out cities from the face of the earth, leaving a scorched desert. And then, months later, new structures began to appear at the sites of destruction. They had no doors, windows, elevators, or stairs. Only smooth surfaces that go up. The people who tried to get inside did not come back. But there were still gliders flying in the sky. Sometimes they reacted, sometimes they didn't. No one understood their logic. They could silently monitor the survivors' settlement for weeks, but not attack. And then, one day, wipe it off the face of the earth without warning. One of the resistance scientists suggested that they are not hunting people, but just waiting. But nobody knew what exactly. "Damn! We're being pulled!" The pilot tried to straighten the course, but the helicopter was slowly turning around. The course has changed. They were no longer moving away from the rift. They were being pulled in. "Let's go. We're leaving now." Nikolai clutched at his seatbelt. But the pilot was no longer in control of the car. They were moving along a different trajectory. The rift trembled. He was no longer passive. He was tightening them. The helicopter was shaking as if it had fallen into an air hole, but Nikolai knew it wasn't turbulence. It's the sky. It no longer held them. The car tilted slowly forward, and the pilot, pressed into his seat, stared glassy-eyed at the dashboard. We're nowhere else." His voice sounded hollow, as if he was no longer aware of himself. Nikolai yanked on the straps and tried to stand up, but the force pulling them pressed down on his body like an invisible weight. The helicopter was going into the rift, and no one could stop it. He tried to focus, but the space around him was changing. The helicopter was no longer flying over the city. Now there were no ruins below, no buildings, just a flat surface stretching over the horizon. It looked like metal, but it was too smooth, too perfect. "Where are we?" One of the fighters was clutching at the walls convulsively, but the space no longer existed. The rift closed behind him like a closing door. They moved to a place they shouldn't have been. Nikolai saw it. Perfect symmetry stretched out in front of him. Giant structures stretched upward, but now he realized that they were not buildings. They were never buildings. It was a system. They did not invade Earth. They did not destroy humanity. They rewrote reality, creating a new world, adapting it to themselves. Everything that used to be human was now meaningless. "Are we dead?" "What is it?" someone asked softly. "No." Nikolai gritted his teeth. "We're erased. The resistance couldn't win. It just didn't matter. The whole world has already changed, and they've just been made aware of it.